All right, I'm going to call the meeting of the Growth Committee open session to order. We'll start with the approval of minutes from December 6, 2022. Mayor and the seconder, Councillor Harris. On the question, all in favor? Thank you. Next is minutes of December 13th, 2022. Could I get a mover? The Councillor Harris and the second by the mayor. On the question, in favor? All right, thank you. Okay, so we're going to kick it off right away. Sorry, we actually need to get approval of the agenda. I apologize. I'm motioning to approve the agenda for today. The mayor and the deputy. Perfect. Any disclosures of conflict of interest? Good. Okay. All right. So up first, we have the We Believe presentation, which I believe is going to be. Okay. No, me neither. Actually, we'll move on to the next item. Does that make sense? We'll go to 7.1. Okay, so we'll kick it off with the 7.1, the Community Services Reserve Policy, and we're going to hear introduction from Commissioner Hamilton. Oh, there he is.
Yes, good afternoon, members of committee. We are before you this afternoon for your consideration related to the new policy for a proposed community services reserve. You will recall that $800,000 in funding was put aside as part of the 2023 budget process to implement the priorities of council as it relates to quality of life initiatives in St. John. And it is envisioned that this fund could help support one-time initiatives aimed at initiatives like affordable housing, promoting community development and social inclusion, and enhancing our property compliance programs. With that, I'll turn it over to David Dovelstein, our Director of Growth and Community Planning, to provide an overview of the policy that's before you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of Growth Committee. I'm very pleased to be before you this afternoon to talk about how we might spend money on things that really drive quality of life for our community. As the Commissioner indicated, and you all know, Council set aside essentially a reserve, and not formally yet, that's partly what we're doing through this process. They set aside $800,000 during the 2023 budget to really give flexibility to Council in achieving your goals to drive quality of life initiatives and enhancements for community services and inclusion. And so what staff have taken an approach to doing, and this is again a first draft. So there'll be a few options that you can choose to do today. So this is as much a presentation as a discussion, open-ended discussion. So option A is maybe we nailed the policy based on what you've told us previously and what the direction that we received during the budget process, and this is exactly what you wanted. You could approve it to send to council, and then this becomes policy, in which case you can use going forward to tap into for projects that you want to realize. Option two is you could decide to say to staff, hasn't cut the mustard, take it back to the drawing board, and then we'll go back and reevaluate with the comments, and we'll bring it back again. Option three is you could take a hybrid approach. You could say, it's not quite there yet, but if you make these changes, we're supportive, so bring it to council with those changes. So with that in mind, I'll just quickly go through some of the highlights. So the idea here, and you would see in your appendix, we took the liberty of reviewing the other reserves that are in a sense at the disposal of Growth Committee, or at least under the oversight of Growth Committee. Because one of the things that we're looking to do is make sure that you're equipped with the proper tools to accomplish the goals that you've set as part of your work plan. So the idea here is these would be unrestricted funds other than what's in the policy here. And this would be, it's one-time funding, but our suggestion from staff is that you reevaluate this reserve after 24 months. You have a number of other reserves, which I won't get into, but you have it in your kit. You can ask questions if you like. After 24 months, we'll do an evaluation. And if you determine there's, it's really useful to have this specific pot of funds, independent of the other ones we have, we think we should consider topping it up. That becomes part of the annual budget exercise for consideration. So the idea here is this is a reserve that will drive council's agenda with regards to community inclusion, community services. So some of the topics that we know that you've shared with us that you want to potentially see us funded through this would be new municipal models that enhance capacity related to housing, particularly affordable housing, homelessness, community enhancement, the community enhancement program, inclusion. We've heard feedback from you on support towards community centers, and other cities which again drive that agenda. The fund can also be used to advance specific items in council-approved strategies that really align with this community service agenda as you define it. And really, you would be the judge of defining whether it fits that criteria or not. We have a number of criteria that we've set through in the policy, and I won't go through them all in detail, but they would be evaluation criteria through which we would use as a lens, and which you as committee would use as a lens to help guide you in making a recommendation to council. So again, our suggestion is that this would be, in a sense, non-recurring, which is pretty typical of our other reserves. So this isn't for permanent programs necessarily, it's for innovation. It's for piloting new things. It potentially could be used for third parties. We have some framework ideas that we're suggesting through the policy. We're suggesting also that no more than $250,000 be spent any one time on any one project. Now, you may feel that's too much, not enough, but you also would have flexibility, and council would be able to deviate from that as they have prerogative to do so. Third parties wouldn't be eligible to apply for the fund, but if they're applying for projects, you could determine as growth committee whether you think this fund would be useful to support their project. And again, the idea here is that it would only be funded, projects can only be funded for 1 year unless you would do some type of evaluation. Now that is yet to be determined. It's not prescriptive yet, and that we could flesh it out for you later on again if you like that approach. We wouldn't suggest you use the reserve to waive fees necessarily. You can talk through that question, but part of the challenge with fees is there's usually a legislative requirement for us collecting fees, either in legislation or in bylaw. So it's tricky to do so. So it may not be waiving, but there are ways around that potentially if that was something that was of importance to you, or we have other reserves with other tools to do so. Obviously, procurement would have to align with our policies. And again, we did leave a bit of a clause in, even though this wasn't discussed, and I would say this isn't the intent of the fund, but if there's a grant for capital projects for third-party organizations, so again, you mentioned community centers, particularly the east side might be something you're interested in advocating for. Well, if this was for a piece of property or land that isn't owned by us, we're a little handcuffed. So this again gives you flexibility if you choose. It's not required. And again, spending on capital can eat up funds quickly. So then we outlined that there would be a business case that we would suggest that attached. And it's pretty well the same conditions that are in our strategic capital reserve, which you also have access to. So the rest is just the governance about oversight, and we're happy to take any questions or any other feedback that you have on whether you like this as is or would like changes.
I'll throw it over to Her Worship.
Thank you. I'm just going to move the recommendation. It looks good to me to get it on the floor for debate. Yeah, no, it's great. Appreciate all the work in it.
Councillor Lowe?
Yeah, was when we did the budget, the $800,000 was to look at doing something in the eastern part of the city where we discovered, and it was actually through the Y that I found out, that the rate of children was 90%. And we have nothing. We have something way out in the Hope Center out in Loch Lomond. But as I think about it now, I definitely don't think we should put a limit of 250 on it, but I think we should wait till we see what happens at the end of it, at the end of February, when that grant's coming, could be coming for the other situation. I mean, that's what I thought the purpose of the $800,000 was. And we discussed it the night of the budget, and it was set aside. And we are doing things east. We're doing a lot of things east, or we're pretending to do a lot of things east. And if we do it, I think that this money can definitely be enhanced to the area where we get trailer parks, we got the Glen Falls School, we got the Forest Hill School, we got an area where we got to help the children. Simple as that. And I thought that was the purpose of this money.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, won't dispute sort of your interpretation of what happened, and certainly your CIO is here to share staff's perspective, but we would have heard a number of pieces of feedback on how councillors thought the funding could be used, and our attempt here in the policy was to create a bit of a framework, but enough flexibility for you to decide whether you want to put your eggs in that basket, whether you want to support a municipal housing entity, whether you want to focus on other priorities, like community enhancements. So there's flexibility baked into the policy. And certainly you can take away feedback that you provide. I don't know, CAO, if you have any comments particularly on.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Yes, Madam Chair, through you to the councillor. This fund was meant to address a number of issues that were brought forward by members of council at the time that the budget was passed. Certainly the East Side Community Development Support was one of several initiatives, but there were also suggestions that funds were needed to further support the city's efforts around affordable housing, as well as bolstering potentially some of the community enhancement compliance programs. So it's really an opportunity, a funding opportunity for a variety of initiatives that are intended for one-time support, so not sustainable program funding, but one-time support. And really that was why the intention of the limit of the $250,000 was put there, so that it could reach as many initiatives that the committee and council deemed were appropriate for those funds.
Councillor Harris?
Yeah, it's just a tiny confusion probably, because I agree with Councillor Lowe. The east side, though, my solution would not be so much to put a lot of money toward it until we identified and saw a local group that already doing things that we could get behind, and then have them ask us for that amount of money so that we could empower a new initiative to kind of continue to make impact over there. So either way we frame that, we definitely want some money there. But do I understand correctly that there are some restrictions around how much money can be approved to any one project at once? It looked like 250K.
That would be correct.
So my only concern there is that the dart throw on standing up a municipal housing entity would be $1 million, understanding that we're hoping that we can get other levels of government to support us, as they did in Miramichi. Help walk me through how this opens up the window for us to do that.
Sure. So theoretically, because again, we're still starting to
course.
review the process. But again, to the commissioner's point, if that is a project that council wants to approve and proceed with, the idea is this fund would be designed to give innovation funding or startup funding. It wouldn't anticipate something starting fully out of the gate. But the other aspect is, let's presume that maybe council does approve a municipal housing entity. Well, this will just cover the first year of operation. There's consequences for what that would mean for subsequent years. And that's a broader conversation in terms of, is it the city funding this? Is it other levels of government, private sector partners? So this helps us get the engine going, and that bit gives the flexibility for that. But again, the desire here wasn't to necessarily have the ability, unless you want it, to put all your eggs in a single basket, considering the different variety of requests that we heard from council during the budget process.
Yeah, so my 2 cents would be, excuse me, sorry, that I think we do need the flexibility to put our eggs in one basket should we need to do that. Because my limited experience around this table says you start the year with 4 or 5 initiatives that you're hoping to get somewhere. And there's a couple of them are pretty high priority. And usually, it seems, only one of them, maybe 2 of them, make it through the noise and make it through the extra things happening to a place where they can be funded and need funding. So I know I'm cognizant of the fact that we had not used all of our growth reserves last year, or the year before that, from what I understand. I don't think there's been a year that we've had where we've used our growth reserves up. And so I would rather have a good thought in July, whether it be a really good project that has clearly made itself available to us on the east side, or whether it be, no, we've got the final report, we know what the costs are, but we need this much money. Have that capacity to do that would be I think, meaningful. I do think the warning there is clear, but we need to be able to see, oh, we're in August, there's no way we're going to have something ready for funding on this project until December. That's next budget cycle, right? So that's where I lose track on the policy piece. Having that cap creates, I guess, a situation where I don't think we can fully make a good decision and fully resource something when we have the opportunity to.
Councillor McKenzie, Deputy Mayor, sorry.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess I'm a little, I guess I misunderstood it too, because I thought that it was $800,000 put aside, and I thought that the conversation that Councillor Stewart and Lowe were having in terms of the Lower East Side is what sparked this whole conversation. And so when you connect those dots, why wouldn't I have thought that that money was related to that conversation about the Lower East Side, the 90% poverty and all that? So if it's not, then that's okay. But I mean, I think that it's going to take more than what's here to fulfill a larger expectation in terms of meeting that need where this conversation started, and then having other, opportunities come up and funding some of those. So, I mean, if I'm on the right track here, that this is related to that conversation that Councillor Stewart and Lowe started with the Lower East Side, then maybe what we need to do is we need to take, as Councillor Harris said, the cap off and make sure that the door is still open for that dream to come true. And not say, well, you can only have 250,000 of this, and there's no more money coming down the road. Like, I don't want to close that door based on the handcuffs of this. That's all. So I just want to take the handcuffs off.
CEO.
Yeah, through you to the counselor. We have money set aside. We're going to be going through another budget cycle. We don't have full clarity on what the need is. So once we do get clear on the need, if there is more funding, then, we need to look at it in terms of, do we put it on capital? Is there a need there? What is the true need and what is the order of magnitude? And then is there opportunity to leverage funding, through other entities? So, would we be seeking 50% or something greater? As you know, we always attempt to do that. So even though it's 250 listed, I would say the opportunity could be greater because we would be seeking funding from others. And then once we get clear, as I say, then we can revisit this. But right now, we're a bit uncertain. We know there's some desires in terms of various projects that want to move forward. If there is a capital need on a community center, for example, then that's something we need to take away and look at separately.
To Mr. Delbastine.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, or to the committee, actually. One thing to bear in mind with reserves is they carry over. So there's no risk of the money disappearing by the end of the year, unless you decide to spend it. But it will carry over. So to the CAO's point, one of the first things we would do in evaluating any of these projects is a needs assessment on what is the need on the east side with regards to community centers. What is the need for municipal housing? What is the need for community enhancements, et cetera, et cetera. And those are eligible expenses to help us start costing those out. So that gets us a ways down the road. Now, you also, and this is part of the reason we included the appendix on other reserves, you have other reserves which you can use for other purposes that may be related to the projects that you have in mind. And so, again, there's a suite of tools. You wouldn't use a hammer to saw a board in half, but you might use a saw to cut that board. So we have a series of reserves and a series of tools which you can use. And again, this would just be another tool in your chest to help you advance growth and quality of life. So we hear from the councillors, you're advocating again for sort of no limit. I guess my question back to you is, do you have a limit in mind? Because again, we're trying to future-proof this as well. There's a possibility that you may determine you want to keep this reserve in perpetuity. If it got up to a couple $1 million, would you still say no limit. So I guess that would be the question back to you in terms of this feedback.
Counselor Harris?
Just to correct Deputy Mayor, I guess the conversation around the growth reserve happened long before we started talking at the budget cycle. It happened when we passed a couple of motions actually, back in July and September. One was to stand up a municipal house, or to pursue standing up a municipal housing entity. And the other one would have been to pursue this advocacy projects that we have right in front of us. Now, this advocacy project that we have in front of us, we could discover that there's a reason to dip into that reserve to do something substantial related to it. So this growth reserve, I don't think has any one person's fingerprint. There are a number of conversations that carried over from last year that we've only talked about 2 of them. I just mentioned a third. I could mention 3 or 4 others. So I don't think we want to try to put a criteria in here of who this money belongs to and where it doesn't. But with that in mind, to answer your question, I think the cap should be proportional to the potential. So if you have a potential idea that this growth reserve could resource, so if the growth reserve is being asked for money and you have a $5 million opportunity that you can tie it to, and you're saying we do need the full $800,000 to realize that $5 million opportunity, we need a way to quantify it, I think, to make the evidence-based decision here. We need to be able to say, this idea is worth $3 million in social impact and output, and this idea is worth $200,000. Which idea are you going to go with? You're going to go with the $3 million idea. But as long as it's, well, I feel and I think, I'm not interested in removing a cap from 250. I just think we need a criteria to be able to exceed that cap should the proportional funding be required to achieve a better outcome.
So to follow up, something akin to a business case of some type?
Business case, social return on investment, right? Monetary return on investment, those are all things that I think should be considered for the removal of a cap. So then I think that satisfies what staff's asking for, I think, to be able to say, yeah, we don't want any idea to be able to be thrown at councillors from now until whenever this reserve disappears. But if there is one, this is what it would look like.
Okay, just Counselor Lowe to finish. his
No, I just saying, I agree the same way Councillor Harris is talking about the cap too. I think it can hurt us in a lot of ways.
Great. I will add my commentary on that as well to say that I don't agree with the cap just yet until we have a sense of the reasoning behind it, I guess. And is there a possibility, so just to go back to this Eastside thing, if we needed a human being, a human resource, is that outlined in there as a possibility, even if it is a short-term contract? Like that's going to be okay to ask for?
That would be, you could use this to hire city staff
Yeah.
on a temporary basis or contracted staff to do work you said. So that is one of the parameters that would be permitted.
Okay.
And to the point about part of the cap, part of the rationale of the cap is, and
Yeah.
we alluded to this in the Discover Fund,
Yeah.
council determined to spend that entire fund on one project, but it's gone now.
Yeah.
So it's something that you need to weigh in terms of what's of most value to you. Do you want to have flexibility for a variety of projects, or do you want to put more focus on 1 or 2 single projects? That's your decision in terms of what you are directing us to do, and we're happy to do what you're looking for us to do, so.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I would just add, what I would recommend to committee is that, given the feedback that we've heard, that we build in some language between now and going back to council that provides for flexibility to exceed beyond the $250,000 for a business case that addresses things like social return on investment. So we can certainly address that and provide that flexibility for the committee.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, so do we need to refer it back to staff to have that language adjusted, or is this kind of?
What I would suggest, if the committee is comfortable with it, you just provide direction that we proceed to council with a recommendation to approve the policy with an amendment that would provide additional flexibility on the cap.
Okay, so can I get a mover for that recommendation? Counselor Harris, second. Counselor Lowe. On the question, all in favor? Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, David. All right. So on to our next item here. We have the Affordable Housing Grant Program Policy Amendment. So we'll start with Commissioner Hamilton.
Yes, members of committee, this next item is an amendment to an existing policy of council. We are suggesting minor amendments to council's affordable housing grant policy, and these are really intended to clarify the eligibility criteria for the recently launched one-time affordable housing grant program. And it was really intended to make minor changes so that we're able to allow the consideration of projects that are currently in the process of seeking planning approvals, and we'll have those completed shortly. So to provide that a little additional flexibility for the intake process for the committee to evaluate, to consider those as part of the evaluation process. And I would add that Andrew Reid is here if there are other questions of committee members on the change.
Okay, on the question, all in favor? Great. I'm just going to request 1 minute here. Okay, great. Okay, so unfortunately, on the agenda, we did have a presenter, but there was a little confusion there. I did want to recognize that today is Anti-Bullying Day. Kindness awareness might be a nicer way to say it. But so a shout out to all the little kids out there today who are wearing pink and ensuring that everyone is kind to one another. So on that note, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor and the Mayor on the question, in favor. All right, have a great day, everyone.